Hey guys, Baird here. Welcome back to another video. Today, I'm going to give you guys my top 7 big takeaways from the 2020 USAPA rules changes for pickleball. Let's do this. So if you're a tournament player, or even if you're a semi-serious player, it's really important to know the rule book. There's a lot of stuff in there, and there are a lot of really subtle rules. But in the 2020 rules changes, there are a couple of things that I want to tell you about that I find just interesting, or there are really major changes or what have you. So let's start with the first one here. I've got my iPad here. So 2E5C, handwritten markings are allowed on the paddle's playing surface as long as they do not impact the surface roughness and are in good taste. No aftermarket graphics are allowed on a commercially made paddle other than handwritten pin markings. So the rule that your name could only be on like the first, centimeter around the edge guard of the paddle has now been completely scrapped. Now you probably may be thinking like, well, that's not a very big rule change, but it actually kind of is, because a lot of people, and like back in 2016, 2015, when like pickleball was really starting to get going, they would just casually write their name in the middle of the paddle. However, that was illegal. And so they couldn't play in a tournament with that paddle if the ref was aware of it. But now they've scrapped that rule, which means that those old paddles that those players couldn't use can now be used. So if you've had that old paddle with your name written right in the middle of the sweet spot or whatever, if you've got that paddle still laying around, guess what? That is now a USAPA approved paddle. You can now use it. The rule has been scrapped. Okay, so this isn't necessarily a major change. I just find it very, very interesting how sometimes the language can be changed here. So this is 4B2. At the start of each game, the starting server begins the serve from the side of the court dictated by the score. Now, that is very interesting, because if you think about what that means, right at the very start of the game, you serve from the side that is dictated by your score. So the vast majority of the times, your score is going to be 0, right? So since it's even, the starting score or the starting server will start on the right side of the court because your score is even. If it was odd, you would start on the left side. But the question is, why would your score ever start with an odd number when you begin the game? The reason are technical fouls. So they've introduced this rule. They changed the wording because in between games, apparently, players can get a technical foul and the opposing team will get a point. So if that opposing team is scoring first, then because of this rule, the starting server begins to serve from the side of the court dictated by the score. So if you get a point, you have 1, and now the starting server starts serving on the odd side of the court. So there are a couple of other rules changes in the rule book now that talk about like medical timeouts and a couple of rules surrounding the way timeouts works. And basically, there's a couple of things where, like, if you claim that you have a medical timeout of some kind, or you have a medical issue and you have to take a timeout, the medical personnel will come to the court, and then if it's judged that you actually don't have a medical issue, you'll get docked a timeout. It'll become a timeout, okay? But if you don't have any timeouts left, then that's a technical foul, and for obvious reasons, right? And so then the opposite team will get rewarded a point. If that were to happen in between a game, then you have 1 point, and so therefore you start on the odd side. So I think that's just really interesting, and really it's a testament to how specific and how detailed we're getting with these rules these days. As I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but as pickleball grows and as this stuff really starts to snowball, it's important to be very specific with these things. And related to that also, they have a definitions section in the rule book and these changes where they talk about some of the definition changes. Definitions are very, very important, because if you don't have that, if you can't define something, then you can't really iterate on it, and you can't explain it, and you can't really sort of logically explain what the rule needs to be. Okay, number 3, this is an interesting one. Has to do with readiness. 4C, any player may indicate not ready prior to the start of the score being called. So previously, the way this worked, if you're in a tournament match and the referee is about to call the score, only the receiver or the server could say not ready. And typically the signal is either you hold your paddle up or you hold your hand up like this, and that would indicate that you're not ready. And so the referee would wait to call the score. However, now the rule is that any player on the court can say not ready. And this is kind of a big deal because if you're on the receiving end of things and you as the player are at the net, okay, and your partner is walking back to the baseline to receive the serve and you see something going on, you can say to the ref, hey, wait a minute, we're not quite ready. Because your partner may be ignorant to what's going on because they're facing the other direction and they're walking back. So now anyone can say that they're not ready on the court. Now related to this, in Rule 4C2, after the start of the score being called, not ready signals will be ignored unless there is a hinder. So like if a ball rolls on the court or something like that. A player or team out of position is not considered a hinder. So basically, it's like the reason why they changed this is because typically in a tournament match, okay, let's pretend like I'm the referee, the serving team is over here, and the receiving team is over here. What the ref will do is look back and forth, and then oftentimes what they'll do is they'll turn to the serving team, okay, and they'll start to call the score. They do this just kind of naturally because they're going to watch for a foot fault, right? But the thing is, though, is that if they were turning over to look at the server, okay, now they're not looking at the receiving team. And so if they're not looking at the receiving team, then they're not watching for any not ready hand signals. So basically what this means is that when the referee begins to call the score, all not ready signals will be ignored completely unless there is a hinder, again, if a ball rolls on the court or whatever. This just makes it to where, you know, if you're not ready, you got to say that you're not ready well before they even call the score. And this relates to some of the trick serve stuff that we're going to talk about a little bit later. And by later, I mean now. Number 4. This is 4E3. After the score has been called, if the serving team changes serving courts, causing the receiving team to be incorrectly positioned, if you can kind of imagine that in your head, the server shall allow the receiver time to reposition, and the score shall be recalled to restart the 10-second count. If you don't know, once the score has been called, the server has 10 seconds to serve the ball. In a non-officiated match, the server will allow for the same repositioning. So apparently this was in the referee handbook, like this was kind of a known thing, but now it's been sort of immortalized in the rule book, so to speak. And so basically, this keeps people from doing trick serves, which, I mean, I've never seen someone do that. It's a crummy thing to do. Basically, what will happen is imagine I'm standing on the left side, right, and I'm about to serve, but then, and so I get the receivers in their positions, right, but then I move over to the right side of the court and then serve. I mean, it's just a crummy, stupid thing to do. This is what allows that to not happen. It's kind of sad that we have a rule for it now, which probably means that it was happening. Perhaps it was happening accidentally. This does not cover, however, if the receivers are actually in their wrong positions. You can still serve, right? This just keeps you from moving over to the actual proper side of the court and then serving over the receiver, and thus, you know, they have no chance. Again, this is the trick serve stuff. They want to get rid of some of these trick shot kind of things. Okay, number 5, line calls. This is 6D8. All let or out calls must be made promptly. Otherwise, the ball is presumed to still be in play. Promptly is defined, going back to these definitions here, as calling let or out prior to the ball being hit by the opponent or before a dead ball is declared. So the wording that they used in the 2019 rulebook was instantly. And look, I get a ton of emails about rules and like, is this or that, you know, legal or illegal or whatever. One of the big ones I get is about line calls. Like what does instantly mean? But now that it's been actually defined as promptly, calling let or out prior to the ball being hit by the opponent or before a dead ball is declared, now it's pretty well established now. Now, if you think about that, this means that if a ball goes out and then I lob it up 50 feet into the air, lands in the back court, and right before the opponent runs all the way back, 3 or 4 seconds have gone by, and then right before they hit it, can I call it out if it was really out? I guess via the rules, probably so. Now, would I do that? No, of course not. But it's good to see this being defined here. It's also interesting, though, because what if you had a situation where you were trying to do an ATP, right? So the ball bounces all the way out, you run all the way over, you attempt the ATP, but it hits the net post. However, if the ball was out, if you hit the net post before you call it out, technically the ball's still in play? Ooh, man, that gets into some tricky issues there, but it's good to see that it's actually been, it's good to see that the word has been changed to promptly from instantly, because instantly means right off the bat, and sometimes that's impossible. Okay, sorry for the lighting change, guys. My light just went out. So, this is a huge one. Number 6, hydration breaks. In 2019, we had a new rule come into effect. It was basically like a officially recognized hydration break where you could say, ref, we need to take a hydration break, if it was the summertime or whatever. And they say, okay. But the rule was that you could take a hydration break and drink, but you could not talk to each other. Now, this rule was totally broken because what was happening is that players were using it as an excuse to take a timeout, essentially, because it basically is a timeout. And also, it was hard to enforce not talking. Like, that was easy to break, and it's just not a good rule to have. And so they've changed it to where they'll just allow hydration. So basically, the point is over. You can go and get a drink. Go and get a drink, grab your towel. It basically becomes tennis in a way, where people will start to take more time in between points, but it's really important. I mean, pickleball can get pretty intense in hot weather. If you've ever played in 105 degree weather with no cloud cover, it is brutal, especially if you're playing singles. So this is an important thing. It's a good change. However, it's going to be interesting to see how this kind of turns out in terms of timing, because the referee is going to be in charge of keeping up with the flow of the game, the pace of play, right? So because if you imagine this in a singles setting, if you're playing singles and you're taking these hydration breaks after every single point, it's going to drag on the game for quite a while. So the question is, will they introduce rally scoring as a way to counteract with all the time that's being spent in these hydration break periods? So it's going to be interesting to see how this turns out. I'm playing a lot of singles this year. I will be using this rule every single game. That is for sure. Okay, and the last takeaway here, number 7, has to do with general referee discretion. There's a lot of stuff in the rule book that has to do with the referee having more control over the game. There's a lot of stuff in here about medical timeouts, about the referee calling the tournament director or the medical personnel over, this new stuff with the hydration breaks and making sure that the flow of the game is continuing, and so on. And I think it's really interesting because, as I said earlier, as pickleball grows and as things get more popular and as we have a bit greater audience and more money comes into the sport, the ability to control the rules of the game in a proper setting is going to be essential, especially on the professional level, where at some point, these people need to keep up with their performance, with their tournament performance, either for reasons of sponsorships or just to make a living. And so giving more power to the referee and making sure that the referee is properly trained is going to be essential, absolutely essential as time goes on here. So definitely check out the rule book, guys. If you're a tournament player, you have to read through all these changes. Now, I didn't go over all of them. If I did, this video would take an hour long. It's already going too long, but definitely check out these changes, guys. Those are my top 7 big takeaways, the things that I think are interesting or important in some way. So I hope you guys enjoy the video. I know this stuff is a little dry. Thanks for making it to the end here. Really appreciate it. Head on over to pickleballkitchen.com. Got a bunch of stuff on there. We do a podcast, all that sort of stuff. Thanks for joining me, guys. I'll see you next time.